You're listening to Monday Matters, a Principal Matters podcast production.
Hi, friends. This is Will Parker back with my co-host, Dr. Jen Schwanke, for another Monday Matters. And Jen, we are smack dab in the middle of December as we're releasing this recording.
Well,
Yeah.
I didn't tell you this when we were talking. Guess what tomorrow is?
What?
My 52nd birthday.
Oh my
When
gosh.
we were preparing to record, listeners, and I was like, I'm going to drop this on him because I know that he has no idea because I've never mentioned it. Yeah, December 16th,
Aw,
1973.
Jen.
Yep. Yeah,
So,
happy birthday to me.
Yeah, happy birthday to Jen. Everybody sing along. Well, I'm a January birthday, and I can't imagine, man, what was it like growing up with a December baby when you had Christmas right on top of your birthday?
Well, my parents did their best. The problem was I was the third daughter in 3 years, and I loved my position as the littlest, the baby, the cutie, got everything I wanted. And then my brother, the coveted boy, came along 4 years later on my birthday. So not only did he take my birthday, but he took my status as the cutest and the youngest, and he was a boy. So I've been mad at him ever since. But happy birthday to my brother Josh tomorrow too.
I know we're not going to talk the whole time about your birthday, but
No, we're not.
what's your favorite like birthday dessert or food? Like, what's the
Oh.
thing that Jen always wants on her birthday?
You guys, when I was little, I haven't had this in years. Maybe I'll tell my daughter to make it for me. My mom used to make a Betty Crocker cake, and Betty Crocker cakes are the best, you
Yeah,
guys. They're the
so
best.
moist.
Betty Crocker cake with Betty Crocker frosting, and she would put peanut M&Ms all over them. And it was the most phenomenal thing for a kid.
Mm.
But I've not had it. So
Was
thank you
it
for that.
chocolate or vanilla?
Oh, chocolate. It was
With
chocolate.
and peanut M&Ms?
Yes, and all over the place, and it felt so indulgent and so incredibly for me. So I'm gonna tell my family, and maybe I'll even tell my mom. She should come down and have some of that with me.
Well, I haven't even mentioned the topic of today's conversation,
No.
Jen. So for those of you that have enjoyed our birthday conversation, send Jen some love through social media or through our email. You have been doing a newsletter called Principal Problems that I read every single week, and recently you posted, this was probably a month ago now, someone had written you, and can you set the stage for this? Because I want to talk about politics and education and why sometimes we have direct conversations and why sometimes we don't. And so,
Right.
can you set the stage for the question that came to you about this?
Absolutely. I had, a newsletter had gone out, and it happened to be a very troubling week politically on the national level and on our state level, and honestly locally as well. But this reader came from another state, and so was mainly referring to the national landscape. And this reader said, you've got to address some of this political stuff going on. It's big and it affects us, and you have to take it on. And so I wrote a post about why I was not intending to do that. So I have some pretty strong feelings about this, and my feelings became pretty entrenched in me during COVID, actually. Because I have my own political thoughts, and I have my own ways to advocate, and I have my own news sources that I read and try to understand what's happening in the world. But during COVID, I remember clearly it was the mask wars, and there was so much contradictory information, and boards of education and community members, they were all so angry and so aggressive about this. And somebody came up to me and said, "Well, what do you think?" And it came out just like this. I am not paid to have an opinion on this. And with saying that, I thought, wow, that's really true. What I am paid to do is keep kids safe, follow the law, do what is best in any given time in a changing landscape. And I have stuck to that ever since when I'm doing my work. What I do privately, politically, is my own jam and my own story. But I feel like I've succeeded at work if nobody knows my political leanings.
That's such a great place to start that conversation. And what I don't want to do by having this conversation is, and you and I seem to say this all the time to Jen, to other people, is prescribe the way other people should behave by the way you and I choose to behave.
That's right.
So I just want to say that on the front end. I also recognize that people that are in roles of leadership, whether it's at the school level or the district level, they have a certain responsibility to be very nuanced about how much they talk about things like politics at work or in life in general, because you're representing an entire community of people, and often the pushback, repercussions, or consequences of those conversations can go way much deeper than just for you. I am in a different place now in my life because I own my own company. Um, I'm no longer working directly for one school, but I do represent all the schools that I serve. I mean, so when you look at the schools where I'm coaching and I'm doing masterminds and I'm doing leadership development, my relationships and associations with them, obviously, I want to reflect as positively on them as I can too. So Jen, there's an element of wisdom. I remember sending out a questionnaire probably 6 months ago to a group of trusted principals, just asking them, "How are you managing politics?" And one of them in particular wrote me back and said, "I don't even wanna make a statement in the email, Will, to you about
Mhm.
this because I've seen
Right.
some very serious consequences to people that get too vocal at their work, and I wanna protect the position I have so I can make the biggest difference here that I can." So I do wanna say that out loud too. Go ahead.
Right, right, and the you used the word nuance, and I think that is a critical word here because we can advocate for our students in our schools in terms of legislation and politics by sticking to the facts. And so I have at times from my professional position written letters to legislators,
Mhm,
but I try not to say, "Hey, you're a jerk," or "Hey, I
mhm.
disagree with you," or "Hey, this is wrong." I try to say, "If then, if this law passes, this is going to be the repercussions, positive and negative."
Mm.
So, nuance is really, really important here. And to ask yourself, as you're indicating here, to ask yourself, what are the repercussions if I all of a sudden get all political versus the impact it's going to have?
Yeah. So anytime you have conversations like this, it's easy to be misunderstood too. So we're just gonna go ahead and run that risk. But
Right.
but I but I do wanna say a couple of things that I think are important takeaways for me, Jen, and I'd love to hear you add. You did such a beautiful job in your newsletter of explaining these things too, and you tell a really touching story at the end that I'd love you to bring here as we wrap up here. But before we do that, 1, I love your suggestion, stick to the facts. 2, I think it's important for us to be advocates for our schools in whatever way that is interpreted for your school, because I work with a lot of public schools, but also now with private and with charter and just across the board. But all of us can be advocates for what we believe is the best for our community. So when I write a letter to my legislator, whether it's at the state level or at the federal level, same thing, Jen. I'm trying to write it from the perspective of I'm advocating based on the facts in front of me and what I believe is the best for my kids, my community, the school where I live. um, and then 3, I just wanna say this before I forget, um, 'cause I was on a podcast a few months ago where the host, and I'm just gonna say who it is because 'cause I'll put a link to if anyone wants to listen to this other podcast, but my friend Tim Villegas leads a podcast called Think Inclusive, and he had invited me to talk about my new book, but when I opened up the podcast, it was a time that was in our culture on another one of those days where just some really
Right.
crazy things had been happening. And he was just like, "Man, Will, can we just talk about politics for a second?" And I was like, "Well, are we recording?" And he was like, "Well, yeah, but we'll decide later if we actually want to use it." So I
Right.
was like, "Oh, that's even scarier." But we had a good 40-minute conversation, and I just decided to just answer his questions and speak to the things that I have seen leaders do with being nuanced in this crazy political world we live in. And the one thing I wanna pull f you can listen to the whole conversation if you want to. I can stick a link in the notes, but the one thing I wanted to make sure he understood, and I think our listeners need to hear too, is that at the end of the day, when I see leaders trying to navigate this new federal mandate or this new state initiative or this maybe the district wants me to do this now differently than I did before, and some of it is depending on the winds of politics, it depends on what we're being asked to do that month. At the end of the day, the leaders that I see that are doing the work and holding on to their sanity and their values are the ones that just show up every day and go, okay, whatever the political winds are today, how am I going to love and serve the kids right in front of me? How do I make sure that every child in this school feels valued and they belong and protected? How do I make sure that all these teachers know I'm here for them and we're sharing a mission of caring? Because you know what? A reporter may show up, something may be in the news today or tomorrow, but next week and next month and 6 months from now, these kids are the ones that are gonna be here, and these families are gonna be the ones looking to us to care for them, and so that commitment is what I commend, and so to me, if you wanna be political, then I th you can choose use your own wisdom to know what you should and should not be saying in certain formats. But to me, the most powerful action you can take is the deep care you can give to the people right in front of you.
Hmm. That's right. That's right. And really that comes down to the question you and I have discussed before on this podcast, which is it helps in any given situation to remind yourself, what's my role in this room at this moment? What is my role? And you asked me to maybe reference the story I had in my newsletter, and this was about a gentleman I worked with 20 years ago, maybe 25. He led our district's curriculum department, and I mean to tell you, this man was a masterful leader because he was so unfailingly, maddeningly professional. I never knew what he thought, right? He would navigate these really high pressure conversations. And in the end, we'd all be like, oh, well, we all worked really well to come to a decision. And then the man retired. And I go to this, it was a restaurant or something, and there were pictures everywhere. And I go over and there's some of him playing t-ball with his son and at home with the dog and at the Grand Canyon. And then there were photos of him at marches in DC, in California, I think LA or San Francisco, in Chicago. And he's dressed in a suit because he always did, and he's holding signs. And I didn't even know what side of the aisle he was advocating for, but I'm like, he's an activist? Right? I was shocked. And I told him that, and he's like, "Thank you." He said, "That is the
Mm.
biggest compliment you can give me that you didn't know." And I said, "But we needed your opinions. Why didn't you share what you thought?" And he said, "Because it wasn't the place. At work, it was my job to make room for everyone's ideas, opinions, beliefs, and perspectives." And so that I said my conviction started with COVID, but perhaps it was many years ago with that friend.
Well, Jen, what a great way to wrap up this conversation because at the end of the day, I'm just gonna. I've just finished a book by Brian Stevenson that he wrote years ago about justice. Brian Stevenson is an attorney who spent most of his career defending children who have been convicted of heinous
Mm,
crimes, but had been either
mhm,
sentenced to death or life imprisonment. And he's done just enormous work through his organization of arguing before the Supreme Court on different sentencing standards for children versus adults. And so just
mm,
beautiful work. And he was wrapping up that book by telling the story of a day in court where a man had who had been wrongly sentenced. He was able to get some relief, and an older woman who was there, um, he noticed at the end of the day had been sitting there all day long, and she wasn't even a part of the court hearings. And so he just went up and introduced himself, and she told him, "I'm the mother of a child who was once murdered. And when I went through the whole process here, I realized how broken and hurting so many people are in our communities, both
mhm,
victims, but also people that are being convicted of crimes." She
mhm,
said, "I've devoted the rest of my life to coming here as often as I can and just being present to witness what's happening, but also to be the person people can lean on when they're in grief."
mm,
And
mm,
she said, "You probably know the story from scripture when the woman was brought before Jesus that was being condemned, and he said, 'Let the person without sin cast the first stone.'" And she said, "I see myself as a," what'd she call it? I'm probably gonna misquote it, "as a stone catcher." I'm
mm,
I'm I'm trying to, I wanna be somebody in the mix of all of the craziness of our world to try to blunt some of the stones that people are throwing at each other. And she said, "And I see you doing that same work too." And when I was finishing that chapter, I was just thinking about, of course, I'm thinking about leaders
mhm,
and how every day you're catching stones.
mhm,
You take the hit for your
mhm,
school. You take the
mhm,
heat. You're the one that takes the blunt when something bad's coming or someone says something about your school. So I don't want you to think for a second that Jen and I don't recognize how hard it is. It is hard to be the one taking the hits for your school. But at the same time, we just want to encourage you. You can make a difference by the way you behave, by the way you speak, by the way you participate, by the way you vote. But you can also do it with wisdom and nuance, so that at the end of the day, you are protecting as many of your kids and teachers and ensuring that they have you there, to walk them through that next season. So, man, I hope that was helpful, Jen.
Yes, yes, that was a great conversation. Thank you for opening the door, and to all of our listeners, this conversation probably means something different to every single person listening. So we
Yep.
just hope it was helpful.
All right, friends, if you want to check out our resources, you can always find them at williamdparker.com. And Jen, how can they connect with your newsletter?
At jenschwanke.com, there is a link to subscribe to the newsletter.
Yeah, and happy birthday to
thank you.
Oh,
Thank you.
good Principal Matters
I will
listeners. We hope-
enjoy. I'll enjoy my M&M cake.
That's right. We'll see you guys next time.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Principal Matters, the School Leaders Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, would you take a moment and like, share, subscribe, or leave us a review? In fact, if you share it out with a friend, even more people can become a part of these conversations. Sign up for our newsletter at williamdparker.com for even more free resources. And don't forget to check out our website to learn more about our books, professional development offerings, Grow Academies, masterminds, executive coaching, and keynote presentations. Wow, let's keep learning together. And thank you for doing what matters.
Monday Matters.